Hello, Mark Lowdy here at the IPBC Global 2014 in Amsterdam. We're joined by somebody who's been looking at valuing IP for a long time, arguably longer than anybody else in the business. He's Peter Holden, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development and Investments at IPVALUE Management. Thanks so much for coming to the IPBC Global studio today. What actually is wrong with this idea to say we can ascribe a value to IP, not just when it's transacted, but when it's simply held on the balance sheet?
Well, it depends who you are, first of all. You know, if you're a financial institution, then there's established practices for valuing IP as a debt instrument and for derivatives like that. If you're a large corporation, it's already accounted for on US GAAP if it's acquired, but for organically grown R&D that's been converted as a byproduct into patents, there's pros and cons. If you do value it, then people want to know what the accounting principles for value are, and that's heavily contested right now. There's no generally accepted principles which test the proof of metal in litigation, for example. It's a huge area of controversy. If it's off the balance sheet, companies have tremendous scope for discretion and flexibility in selling non-core patents, in squeezing in licenses before Q2. So it's a tremendously important revenue source that they can call upon as needed to make numbers, whereas there's going to be much more scrutiny if it's on the balance sheet at a prescriptive, prescribed valuation. So there's pros and cons.
Let's take a parallel of a property valuation, because arguably there are lots of valuers there who say, you know, this property is worth this much or that much. The actual proof of the pudding is really in the selling. How much is the market prepared to pay for it? Doesn't that also apply for IP?
It applies for things like standards patents, where you have established royalty rates and established processes, but 99 times out of 100, it's not a good allegory to use. And the reason is because there are tremendous benchmarks and accepted standards where the house is, the geography, the type of house, the age of the house, the interiors, the exteriors. So there's lots of principles and proofs of benchmarking, comparisons and pricing. It's a science, and it's really only plus or minus 5% in fluctuations of valuation. With IP, it's what you can get away with.
Right.
It truly is what you can get away with.
And one of the sponsors actually of the IPBC Global Conference is the Asia IP Exchange, which is, among other things, designed to find that price, to discover the price. Do we need more of these exchanges, perhaps, to provide that 95% certainty that we already enjoy in the property sector?
Well, it's an interesting model because it's based on the propensity of a user to take a license at a fixed licensing unit price. So it's a very creative idea. Whether that will be broadly adopted by the marketplace is to be found out. The jury's still out, because it really requires a user to volunteer that they want a license. And for hundreds of years, evermore, it's up to the patent holder to police those rights and enforce those negative rights against users of those rights. This new model requires people to volunteer. In exchange for volunteering, they get a very favorable rate, which is, but it's also made available to everybody.
Right.
So it's a universal model that could work, or we'll see.
We'll see. So far in our conversation, Peter, we've not really touched on the positives of incorporating the capital value of IP on the balance sheet. There are obviously quite a number of issues that would need to be resolved. But let me challenge you a little bit on that and say, if we weren't able to resolve all of those issues, what benefit actually would there be? I mean, is it something that we should be striving for?
I think so. Several reasons. One is we're in a knowledge economy and IP is the currency. So to properly value companies in this marketplace, you have to recognize a huge part of their total net worth is in the underlying R&D as manifested, not just in products and services, but also in the quality of their intellectual property. And if you look at any high margin business, the top of the food chain is the IP and the people, and everything tears down from there. So the benefits of capitalizing it are lower cost debt, the increased IR, PR benefits of people truly appreciating the underlying value of their assets, and they're being capitalized as such on the balance sheet. And as long as the accounting and the investment services understand how these assets are valued, and can get to consensus in the pricing methodologies used, I think it's an inevitability. And if the US doesn't lead the way, I think we'll find other economies in the vanguard of driving these processes.
Such as Japan, which you're familiar with? Or?
Japan or China, but some of the kind of gateways like Hong Kong or hinterlands like Singapore that are trying to establish themselves as an IP hub, where they're offering tax-free benefits, Ireland as another. So it would be a natural extension to offer accounting processes to companies that become domiciled in these territories to put the value of the assets on the balance sheet, which would significantly improve the market cap potentially if you get consensus by Wall Street and the city that this is indeed a valid and legitimate thing to do. And that remains to be seen.
And perhaps it'll give a rise to a whole new industry of IP valuers, building on, I suppose, those who are already in the market doing this.
Yeah, you look at companies like Qualcomm and ARM in the UK, they are IP companies where almost all of their value is from leveraging their intellectual property. And so were Qualcomm to better represent the value of its seminality of IP, you could argue that the market cap would be significantly higher, and it should be.
Well, and that finally brings me to another point that Frans van Houten from Philips made at the conference this morning, and that is that one of the main questions he gets asked is by retail investors who put their hand up at the annual general meeting and say, how much is your R&D really worth? How much is it really returning to you? What is the value of all these patents that you talk about? If Frans van Houten was here with us, what advice would you give him as to what to tell his shareholders?
If you can agree on the way in which to value IP, if the accounting firms sign off on principles that everyone agrees to, it's essential that these assets are listed on the balance sheet to truly represent the underlying value of the businesses, and leveraging IP not just from a cross-licensing point of view, but things like supply chain royalty relief for your distributors and vendors, entering new markets as a competitive deterrent to copiers, to things like the IR/PR benefits of having such important IP on the balance sheet.
Thanks very much for coming down.
Thank you very much.
Peter Holden from IP Value Management here at the IPBC Global 2014 conference in Amsterdam.